The vessel you're searching for is the Edmund Fitzgerald.
The Edmund Fitzgerald was born of the same kind of iron ore that it carried even up until its tragic sinking. Forged from hot furnaces and assembled at the Great Lakes Engineering Works near Detroit, Michigan. Designed as Hull 301, the Fitzgerald would be one of the last freighters built in Michigan. The largest ore carrier ever designed at that time, Hull 301 would cost over $8.4 million to build. Over 729 feet in length, the Edmund Fitzgerald was the first ship to be created using sub-assemblies. These huge half-sections would be built, launched, and inspected, then floated to the crane to be lifted into place. Once assembled, the hull sections would create the main deck of the ship, called the spar deck. The Fitz had a massive 870,000 cubic feet of space within 3 cargo holds, which were loaded through 21 cargo hatch openings. At the bottom of the number 3 hold was this suction well, called a rose box. 6 electric pumps could be used to drain water from the hold, but only when the ship was void of cargo. Water from any of the 3 holds could easily flood the entire length of the ship because the Fitzgerald's holds were separated only by a mesh screen and not a watertight bulkhead. Here the giant prop shoe is welded to the end of the ship, ready for its 19-foot propeller to be added on. Powering that giant prop was a 7,500 horsepower steam engine, originally heated by coal. These giant coal bunkers would feed the coal into the ship's firebox, generating steam in these boilers to turn the propeller. The Fitzgerald would eventually best 16 knots, an incredible speed for a giant ore carrier. Launch day arrived on June 8, 1958, and among the thousands of spectators were Edmund Fitzgerald and his family. President of Northwestern Mutual Life Insurance Company of Milwaukee, Fitzgerald was the grandson of a Great Lakes captain. His family and friends are shown waving here from the stage where Mrs. Fitzgerald christened the freighter. Huge blocks of timber were knocked away with sledgehammers, and the largest freighter on the Great Lakes was afloat in the Detroit River. Construction continued both above and below decks. The smokestack was added, eventually painted with a red star and the capital C for Columbia Transportation. The Fitzgerald broke several hauling records. In 1964, the Fitz was the first ship to carry more than 1 million tons of ore through the Soo Locks. She bested that record 4 years later, carrying over 27,000 tons each time the vessel came through the Soo. Her frequent trips from Silver Bay to Toledo took only 5 days, earning the Fitz the nickname Toledo Express. At 75 feet in width, the Fitz barely squeezed through the Soo Locks. The The Fitzgerald wasn't making its usual run when it left Superior, Wisconsin on November 9, 1975. Bound for Zug Island near Detroit, the Fitz was scheduled to unload only a few hundred yards from where she was born. Loaded with over 26 long tons of national ore pellets, the Fitz set out on Lake Superior under sunny skies, eventually meeting up with the steamer Arthur Anderson near Two Harbors, Minnesota. The duo soon realized that a storm was approaching, and both captains decided to take the northern route, running close to Isle Royale and the north shore of Canada. Here the ships would sail in calmer waters as the northwest winds kicked up waves further south. That protection was short-lived, as both ships had to turn into those waves in order to reach Whitefish Bay. It was here that the Anderson reported huge waves, and the skipper of the Fitzgerald admitted these were the worst seas he had ever seen in his 44 years on the lakes. Captain Ernest McSorley also reported damage which was listing his ship, tipping it sideways in the storm. "We're holding our own," he told the Anderson, believing he would make it to Whitefish Point. McSorley had more than a storm to contend with. His radars were out, and his only visual guide, the Whitefish Point light, was darkened by a power failure. The Anderson tried to keep a radar fix on the Fitz, but in a blinding blob of sea return, the Fitzgerald vanished. Captain Jimmy Hobaugh was formerly group commander in Duluth before taking command of the buoy tender Woodrush in 1975. One of his first rescue runs of that season would be a valiant run to save those aboard the Edmund Fitzgerald. He knew the 24-hour run through the storm would be dangerous, but his ship was the only rescue vessel available at the time. The thought of distressed sailors made the crew press on.
There was just never a question in your mind that you would be there, and no matter how uncomfortable you were, there are other people out there that were less comfortable. And we just, we never even thought about it.
Hobaugh had seen his share of storms, but this one was different.
I've been in the ocean in North Atlantic storms, and yeah, it's rough, but the period between the swells is long. In the Pacific, it's even longer. Up here in the lakes, it just hammers you. Up here also that night, for instance, when we got here, the seas were coming down from the northwest, hitting the Canadian shore and ricocheting off. They're hitting the U.S. shore and ricocheting off. So you got three seas coming at you from three different directions. And remember that the well deck on a buoy tender is relatively low. Even though we had the shutters in, we were taking green water right over the bow, right over the sides of the ship. And of course, the freeing ports are big enough that it would free itself. But I mean, the point is, there's no way that you could turn the ship where you were riding this way. You were either, normally in the ocean, you can either pitch or roll. Out there, you pitched and rolled at the same time.
Searching for 4 nights, the crew found very little from the wreck.
We probably found the last thing that came off of the Fitz when we got there 20-some hours later. It was a life ring with a light on it. Everything that came off of her came off when she went down. The lifeboats with the flotation in them. By the time we got there, they were already ashore in Canada. The Canadian shore picked up most of that. The life rafts, the life rings, the life boats, the inflatables were all on the beach in Canada.
Captain Hobaugh and the crew of the Woodrush returned to the wreck site 5 months later, this time equipped with an underwater camera. Mother Nature didn't like the intrusion.
And it was just one night. It was like you anchored over my ship and I'm going to slap you. Because for the next 10 days, it was just like a mirror.
The rough seas caught the crew just as they tried to moor to the wreck site. The marking buoys were pulled under and crushed as the crew fought to stay in place.
It imploded 2 of the buoys, just crushed them like an eggshell. I figure, looking at the mathematics and geometry of the thing, that they were probably drugged 200 feet deep.
The seas calmed for the rest of the mission, which was even more eerie than the freak storm that had greeted the search team.
And it was so calm that you know, we had our dog on board. The dog didn't bark. People, it was like everything was muffled at night, even the generators running. Just an eerie feeling. It was a very, you can get emotional about it, you know, and you can get, if you believe in ghosts and so forth, you can imagine that.
The Woodrush spent 4 days at the site, lowering the Curve 3 camera down 500 feet to the twisted wreckage below. Broken in 2 pieces, the Fitzgerald was found to be facing proudly upright at the bow, yet upside down at the stern. 56 hours were spent recording the wreck, but the Curve unit didn't see everything, including the ship's bell, which was listed as missing in the official Coast Guard report. That same report listed leaking hatch covers as the probable cause of the sinking. The wreck site remained quiet until 1980, when an expedition led by Jean-Michel Cousteau returned to the Fitz. Divers aboard the Soucoupe were the first to see the Fitzgerald in person.
It was obviously a very emotional situation because we were the first human eyes to go down and see for ourselves what was going on. The weather can be very treacherous, very nasty. It can turn in minutes. So you have windows of opportunities which are very small, and it's deep and a little spooky as a result of all of this.
Bad weather again blocked attempts to see the entire wreck. The submariners spent less than an hour below and were forced to return to the surface.
Falco, our chief diver, was down there, and one of our cameramen was down there to film it so we could put it in one of our shows we did on the Great Lakes. And I had to call the submarine back because the weather was getting bad.
The Edmund Fitzgerald managed to stay out of headlines for nearly another decade before another investigation brought it back into the limelight.
We did not venture to the Edmund Fitzgerald to seek out information on how the accident happened. That was not one of our objectives. We were interested primarily in a high-profile, high-visibility site that we could test some equipment that would aid in survey and documentation of other deepwater shipwrecks. And as importantly was to focus some attention on the historic shipwrecks we have in the Great Lakes.
We were interested in the technology. It just happened that we did it on the Edmund Fitzgerald, and we were just shocked by the amount of press coverage. We had calls from all over the place. We had interviews that we were having to give aboard the ship all the way to places like New Zealand. And we finally asked the marine operator to stop calling us because there was just so many requests, and we were trying to get the work done.
Technology was about to record the wreck in amazing detail.
One of the things, of course, you lose with video format is your depth perception. So one of the rather novel approaches of that '89 expedition was to use miniature stereoscopic cameras, essentially just 2 different cameras taking the images from a slightly different angle. We could then take the videotape and project it back in 3D using the lenses, using the funny little goggles that you've all seen on some of the movie theaters of the past.
The cameras found several things missed by the Coast Guard, including an open door in the pilot house, evidence that the crew may have tried to escape the sinking ship. They also located the bell.
On our first dive down to the vessel, lo and behold, we found the radio direction finder and the bell intact sitting on the bow. That put a little suspicion, of course, in terms of some of the other results of the U.S. Coast Guard report that was originally completed.
Researchers returned to the Fitzgerald 5 years later, this time bringing a multi-million-dollar submersible called Clelia.
This is a three-man submarine. It belongs to Harbor Branch Oceanographic, as does the ship. They've been up here now for 6 weeks in the Great Lakes working on toxic chemicals. We've taken 3 days here at this particular site because the submarine is quite wonderful. It carries 3 people to a depth of 1,000 feet. It has a panoramic window up front, so you can actually put 2 people up front there and they get a terrific view of what's in front of them. It's got the same kind of lights that we used on the Titanic just a few years ago, and high-resolution cameras. And the combination of those 3 factors, plus having all these dives and all this time, is giving us a chance to make a site plan of the wreckage below us right now.
Clelia recorded the wreck in remarkable detail.
Well, this is our last dive. We've been here now for 3 days. This is the 6th dive. We've spent now something like 14 hours on the bottom. We've had the cameras all through the debris field, through the bow section, the stern section, and on the dive just prior to this one, put the camera and the light actually inside the pilot house. So we've got a lot of information that's new and I think pretty exciting in terms of trying to piece together what happened in the final moments of this shipwreck.
Subpilot Tim Askew says seeing the wreck in person brings more detail than just a camera. He was amazed by the force created when the ship hit bottom.
Many times the human eye is much more perceptive than a video camera at a distance especially. To be able to actually see damage that was previously unknown, such as the crack. So we did determine there's a crack all the way around the bow, which indicates that the bow of the ship hit the bottom with a tremendous force.
More and more clues were surfacing about the wreck, except the deepest, darkest mystery of them all. What happened to the crew? That mystery would be solved only a few days later. Michigan businessman Fred Shannon led the first privately funded expedition to the wreck site in July of 1994. After setting the unofficial longest dive to the wreck, he allowed the owner of the tug, Anglian Lady, and his son to tour the wreck site. They found a human body lying on the bottom near the bow section.
In fact, Scott was almost expecting to see a body. He had discussed it before we went down, thinking that we might see something and what it would be like. And we'd been at the funeral home a week ago to visit a friend, and so it wasn't much different.
Shannon's use of the body footage upset many family members who pushed local legislators to outlaw photographing shipwreck victims. Canadian authorities who oversee the waters surrounding the Fitzgerald were also asked to seal off the site from further scrutiny.
This year we had the introduction and passage of legislation that was aimed at prohibiting divers from photographing human remains. That was a direct result from the impact of our team in '94 finding the body. And we believe it's unnecessary legislation, puts a lot of constraints on the sport diving community.
The most expensive dive to the Fitzgerald took place while the United States was celebrating Independence Day. 2 Canadian submersibles and a special dive suit were used to cut the bell from the top of the Fitz. Whitefish Point Museum Director Tom Farnquist explains the approval needed to recover the memorial.
We had all the family members, they were all polled by family members themselves. We had permission from the owners of the vessel, Northwestern Mutual, and the 3 insurance companies that paid claim on the wreck. So we jumped through all the hoops, and we had to do that for the Canadian government before they would give us permission to raise the bell. And then, of course, when the Canadian Navy came aboard, it was really a complete project.
The newt suit was videotaped with a high-definition television camera on both the front and back of the wreck. News accounts indicate that the crew did see bodies, but dive leaders swear they were not recorded.
Well, we made a promise to family members that we would not photograph any remains, and if we did come across them by accident as we were moving along in the submarines or the newt suit, that we'd shut the cameras off instantly and we'd destroy the footage if we did happen to accidentally photograph a body. The families didn't want to see images of their possible loved ones on the bottom, and we honored that.
Farnquist, who has been on 3 expeditions to the wreck, said the bell recovery would be his final visit. The bell, replaced with a replica, now sits in Whitefish Point Museum. Not everyone was excited about the bell recovery.
I didn't see the need for it. Every year for 20 years, and probably forever, there will be a memorial service in Detroit where the first bell rang. There was an awful lot of politics involved. There was an awful lot of sleight of hand. You know, it's like a medicine show. Certain people have very few scruples in my mind, and I'm not the least bit reticent about saying that.
I feel very good about what we did, and I feel better every time I talk to the family members. It's nice to see the pain kind of slowly subsiding, and it's been good for the museum. There's no question about that.
It's been good for dozens of museums, whose visitors all want to know more about the Great Lakes' largest shipwreck.
It really is an interesting phenomenon because we've retired our Fitzgerald exhibit 3 times, and the public won't allow it. So we keep recreating, you know, an exhibit that brings it a little more up to date. We have other, you know, very dramatic losses and accidents and storms which mark regional history, and yet none has been so widely publicized as the Fitz has, at least in this century. And so that's kind of the lightning rod for people's attention when they come here. They want to learn more about the Fitzgerald.
Few wrecks have stirred up as much controversy as the Edmund Fitzgerald. It's become $1 million industry, much to the dismay of those who lost family and friends when it sank. Its legendary status continues to haunt and mesmerize those who are connected with it.
The Fitzgerald is obviously an icon, and it has a role for various reasons of focusing people's attention. I think there were a lot of reasons. Probably as important was Lightfoot's ballad. Also, I think it was pretty much a kick in the head to folks at the time. I could not believe that the baby of modern technology, and the Fitzgerald was not an old vessel, could have been beat by the lakes.
There are ships sinking all over the world all the time. We never talk about it. But that particular one was right there and was the pride of the fleet, and a lot of mystery because no calls were recorded and everybody was lost. So it became a big deal.
It was a weird, eerie time, and you don't sleep. And we were out there for 4 nights and 3 full days. We came in on the 4th day, we came in to the Sioux.
What really happened to the Edmund Fitzgerald? No one doubts it was the storm that sank the ore carrier. The debate remains over the ship's final moments.
I have to kind of go along with a theory that was presented to me about the 3 sisters. And this is a well-documented fact in the Great Lakes that they do get large waves and they come in 3s. And I think that had something like the Three Sisters, or if it wasn't that exactly, contributed to having the bow nosedive. And once it did go, the fact that the ship was traveling at a high rate of speed and was overcome by waves and started to go down, and of course the cargo shifted forward, because even though the vessel was only carrying 26,000 or 27,000 tons of taconite, it was capable of, that in itself would not fill the holds, which as it nosedived down caused that cargo to shift forward, further driving the nose down. And since the ship was longer than the water was deep, when the bow hit the bottom and started plowing in, there was a good 100 to 200 feet of the stern section basically standing out of the water, sticking out of the water. And of course the engine is in it, and all the aft superstructure and stack and everything like that, which is very heavy, probably caused the aft end of the vessel to just literally break off and twist off as the ship was going down. And we know that they're separated on the bottom with the stern section laying upside down.
I have come to a conclusion, and it's been supported by the facts and the evidence that we found at the site, that the Fitzgerald broke into, and it broke into because of structural failure, that it had a poor record, or a questionable record of maintenance, and that on November 10th of 1975, in this hurricane-force winds, it did not have the reserve buoyancy and the strength to handle the sea conditions out there. Unfortunately, there were 29 victims. They never had a chance.
It became apparent that those poor lake sailors who were on the ship, it was very sudden, very critical for them, those last moments. And we think of them very reverentially, because of course they are our brothers. And it was very moving, I know, for all of us to see that and to have that experience.
Will there be more dives? Probably not in the near future. Scuba divers have already visited the site, and new technology is making it possible for further expeditions to probe the depths. New legislation may slow interest in diving the Fitzgerald, but one thing is for certain: the legend will live on.
Standby one, let me get the Arthur Anderson on this frequency. He is the vessel that reported seeing the Fitzgerald disappear from his radar screen, and he was the last one that was in radar contact with him, and I also believe he will be the closest vessel to the scene as he gets back on scene there. But standby one, and we will get him on this frequency. Over. Roger. The thing about it was, we come up there and we called the Fitzgerald to check on him and see how he was doing, and the last contact we had with him, he said, well, he was going along fine and holding his own and no problems. And then he kind of relaxed a little bit, you know, and he was in the sea return, and then when we couldn't see his lights, we figured we should be catching him a little bit because he'd checked down, and then he just wasn't